Greetings. This is Paul Rana, and welcome to our live stream of tonight's talk, Alchemy of the Splendor Solis. Tonight we are going to review one of the most famous alchemical manuscripts, definitely considered one of the most beautiful, and also one of the most prized possessions of the British Museum Library. And they have a lot of things. It is both one of the most important alchemical, most beautiful alchemical manuscripts, as well as one of the most important and one of the most pregnant. So we'll be going through this in depth tonight. We'll talk a little bit about the history of where it comes from, some versions of it that exist, and then we'll go over the plates, all 22 of them in general, in a few different ways. We'll talk about how they can be approached in a more beginner perspective, perhaps, and then how they're also a symbol for, how they're also a guide path for the path from the beginning of initiation all the way to masterhood. So with that, Alchemy of the Splendor Solis. Let's talk a little bit about what this is, where it comes from. This is going to be rather free form. This is not a scripted talk at all. And I want to preface this that I'll be sharing my personal experiences of working with this the last decade. This is not meant to be authoritative, as none of this is the only way to approach this series. None of this is the only way to do the work or the only way to interpret these symbols. But this is where I am at this time and how I understand it, based upon my experience in various esoteric orders, initiatory paths, alchemical work, and working with various plates like this. And what's great about the Splendor Solis is that you can bring in, it distills down into its essence many systems of initiation, processes, and similar experiences foundational to most esoteric systems and orders. And it distills it down to its most basic elements. But even with that, the symbolism is so deep and profound that it will unveil its deeper layers over time as you go through the work. I've been looking at these for a decade, and every time I look at them, you see something new. And as you go through and complete various processes to more or less degrees, that should occur as well. Another thing with the alchemical tradition, thank you, happy birthday, yeah. With the alchemical tradition is to understand that there is no one unified alchemical tradition, but that each alchemist, as they are writing their plates or their documents, is creating a system in its own. It may or may not have links to other alchemical texts, papers, works, even by the same author. They're extremely individual, and each should be approached in its own way. You can read, there's such a vast array of alchemical literature out there. Some of it is pseudoscience, ancient chemistry that is just complete mumbo-jumbo. Some of it is early chemistry that definitely applies today to modern chemistry processes. Others show the path from metanoia, from turning away from the world, to adepthood. Others, such as the Splendor Solis, might give keys beyond adepthood to what perhaps you might call mastery, fully integrating adepthood and learning to project the stone. Others, some may be complete sequences. Some may show only a portion of the process. Some may be intentionally out of order. It's very common for alchemical plates to be out of order, and part of the work is you figuring out how to order them. So keep that in mind whenever you're approaching alchemical series, plates, texts, that you must approach them on their own terms, okay? And they may or may not have Kabbalistic significations. They may or may not link up to other traditions. And I think that tonight we'll use a little bit of language from other systems, such as the Golden Dawn, perhaps, or maybe even Martinism. Maybe a little bit of Tree of Life, just to give a basic grounding. but you really should learn to move beyond those when you approach this specific series and approach it just on its own terms. Glad to have you here. So with this, the Splendor Solis is considered one of the most beautiful manuscripts of alchemy. The most famous version is the 1582 manuscript, attributed to Solomon Trismosin, which is most likely, of course, a pseudonym, a pen name. And it was first published in the Aurum Velis as a part of that larger work. But the most famous is the 1582 manuscript, and that is the Harley 3469 manuscript that is kept at the British Museum. It is an illuminated manuscript on vellum with decorative borders, similar to a book of hours, beautifully painted, highlighted with gold, and there are perhaps 20 copies or various versions out there. The oldest that I've found is 1532, and that's kept in the Prussian State Museum in Berlin. At the end of this talk, maybe in the beginning, we'll compare how some of them are slightly different, and maybe some resources if you'd like to tap into these for future study. So we'll either post something on our Facebook later with links to it, or shoot me a message or something. The plates themselves are 22, and right off the bat, I would say that I do not see any correlation between these and the 22 letters or the 22 major arcana of the tarot. I think that is probably a nice coincidence. The work itself consists of 22 images, and we'll zoom in on each one of these as we go through them. And it shows a symbolic process, an alchemical process, the classic death and rebirth of the individual into the new king and queen. You see there's a series of 4, a series of 7, a series of 7, a series of 4. In the original text, they're just laid out in various pages. The most famous version of this also comes with a text, and that text may or may not have anything to do with the plates at all. I think, in fact, that the text was written far earlier, and that the plates were created much later, and I really don't see a lot of correspondence between them, personally. I think that the text is not all that important, actually. I really think the images themselves are what is so important and special about the Splendor Solis itself. Getting a few things queued up here so we can use them. You see, in this series here, the third row down, a series of alchemical flasks, athanors, alembics, in which there's a transformation of various animals and birds, eventually into these completed queen and king, the white stone, the red stone, or the white and the red tinctures. This echoes many other various types of alchemical manuscripts. It follows a pretty set, clear tradition, even though, like we said, we should always approach these on their own. It definitely incorporates the classical phases of Negredo, Albedo, Citrinitas, and Rubedo, but maybe not in that order. Maybe in that order. Solomon Trismosin himself, the mythical writer of this text, said to have lived in the late 15th, early 16th century. I mean, because this, we see these, at least that's the attribution. There's legends of him, not a lot known about him, other than the various legends that have come down. Claimed possessor of the Philosopher's Stone, claimed teacher of Paracelsus, and he's best known for the Splendor Solis and the Aurum Velis. This text has been published in several versions in modern times. There's been a few commentaries out there. Jocelyn Godwin did a commentary. I think Adam and Clean. Some Jungian guy did one. Transformation of the Psyche, I think the book is called. Yogi Publications did a version that contains a fictional biography of Trismosin and about his quest for the Philosopher's Stone, supposedly written in 1498. And up until recently, there hasn't really been a quality color version published unless you have the $10,000 to buy the Molera facsimile reproduction version. But Godwin, Skinner, and some other dudes came out with this version recently, which is, I would say, the second best color version out there. They're very nice color plates and has a commentary, which is a good start, I would say. We publish this privately at no cost or expense, no profit for OMS members, the complete Splendor Solis. It gathers together 8 different versions of the Splendor Solis in digitally enhanced, high-res, full-color versions. This text has been S.L. McGregor Mathers of the Golden Dawn and RRAC. He held this in high esteem, and this was circulated definitely in the original Golden Dawn order as teachings for the Inner Order, and it has continued on in that same way in many other traditions. I must preface that all the knowledge I have of this is owed directly to the Alchemical Academy of Sweden and to the Sodalitas Rosicrucis et Solis Alatai, which is a Rosicrucian progressive order that has brought together the primary streams of the Western mystery tradition, namely the Golden Dawn and other things. So I was definitely first introduced to it by them, and most of my oral teachings have come from them. And then working with these, having them blown up as large as letter-sized pages, tacked on various walls in every apartment I've ever lived in. We've had these up to just contemplate day in and day out, let them really seep into your unconscious. And today we're going to hopefully give some keys on how to start approaching the Splendor Solis. It's Friday night. Hope you all are enjoying your evening and have a good drink. This is kombucha with a little bit of vodka in it. Can't do alchemy without alcohol, right? Without some mercury. So let's jump into the plates themselves. Before we do, we'll just talk a little bit about a comparison. And if you're interested in geeking out on the depths of these, I can share some of these with you. These are my digitally enhanced versions. This one is from, we're going to show you the same plate in 7 different ways. There's one that I can't share because it's a part of a private collection in Europe. This is from the Aurum Velis. It's quite primitive. It's merely just a flask and 3 dragons, which you can tell are the alchemical colors of Negredo, Albedo, Rubedo. The green lion with 3 heads. German below. And again, like I said, the text does not necessarily line up or have anything to do with or is not necessarily important for this talk or for the work in general. This is another version from the Berlin Codex 78D3, and you see it is much more expansive. There's a lot more going on here. We now have a frame around the flask. We have an outer frame, giving you much more to work with. We also have a planetary attribution to it. Most of your Splendor Solis that people are familiar with uses a version like this. This is the oldest known version, 1532. And why isn't my mouse working? This is the BNF Manuscript Allemande 113. Very similar to before. You can tell it's a different artist. And I find it very helpful in advanced study of these to compare some of these. Sometimes things will jump out you don't see in the other versions. Here's the most famous version out there. This is the Molera reproduction uses this, as does Jocelyn Godwin's New Splendor Solis with Stephen Skinner. The Harley 3469 manuscript. Very beautiful. Very bright colors. We see here another old version from Germany. HS 146766 manuscript. That's the library call number. And like I said, you see different things. This has words in the bottom frame, whereas the other ones we've seen do not. So there might be some additional keys there by exploring that version. This is the Cassel manuscript. A lot of these are in German, obviously. I find this to be kind of an interesting balance between the more simple ones and the more complex. And I really like the watercolors that are used. I'm not sure if that's watercolor, but it looks like watercolor now, 400 years later. It's very otherworldly and dreamy. And lastly, I just called this McLean because I have no idea if it comes from someone else. I found these on Adam McLean's Alchemy website, so I just called them his. I couldn't see a source for it. I'm not sure if they're actually his or if they're someone else's. Maybe someone else knows. But very similar to the original, the simple Aurum Vellus version. All right, without further ado, we're going to pull up this poster I made. It's a nice 3x4 foot poster. Maybe we can make that available to the public too. You can print it out nice and big. Flap it up, drop it up in your wall. And we're going to talk about these 22 plates and the alchemical process. We're not going to go over super basics. We're going to assume that you have some basic understanding of alchemy, of the processes of solvate coagula, of the alchemical goal of making gold from lead, you could say, of transmuting the philosopher himself into spiritual gold. This is not the vein alchemy. This is spiritual alchemy. This is not literal transmutation of gold, which some people are very into. That's totally cool. This is purely the higher spiritual alchemy. So with these, as we go through these plates, some people might say that you go through these as cycles, again and again. Some people will say that you go through them once, and that you complete the process, and it's over. We're going to kind of dance a line of a little bit of both today. I'm not here to tell you what to believe or what to do. I'm just telling you what my opinions are on it. And we'll approach it in perhaps a lower way and a higher way, but we're going to do it simultaneously, so hopefully that works out well. Starting off, like we said, there's a series of 4, a series of 7, a series of 7, a series of 4. These are definitely 4 different sets. The first 4, I would say, comprise the most basic keys of alchemy, the most basic things to remember, the most basic illustration of the entire work and process. And they are mirrored as well as that below. I would say more specifically, though, below shows the before, the after, the beginning of the work, the end of the work, the beginning of the sun setting or rising, the end, the sun rising, a golden dawn, and in the middle is what the rest of the work is as an adept from here out, namely child's play and women's work. And I would say that specifically applies. The entire work should be undertaken with this understanding that this is child's play and women's work, which hopefully will make more clear. But it is more specifically a perspective of adepthood upon your life, your work, and how you approach it. I'm going to go ahead and cut off my camera. These 7 are obviously one of the classical 7 stages of alchemy, of which there are many. We will go back and do a more basic alchemical webinar on using spagyrics as an example. And we'll, in that webinar, talk about alchemical sequences. You can have, some texts have 3 stage, Aleph, Mem, Shin, E, A, O, black, white, red. Some have 4, they might add in a citrinitas between the white and the red. Some might have 7, which obviously most likely has to do with the 7 planets. Some might have 12 stage, which will link to the zodiac. None of those are necessarily correct. None of those are necessarily incorrect. They must be approached in their own way, according to their own terms. What I will say for sure, these 7 series are linked. The above and the below are linked processes. You could say the one above shows the direct conscious work that the initiate is engaged upon in the work. The frames around these show his relation to the world, or his relation to his unconscious mind. Whereas the flasks themselves also show stages of the work. They show perhaps levels of gnosis. And the bottom frame of the plates shows how the initiate relates to the world, or how he views the world at that time in that stage. And I think it's important to understand that an initiate can have a high level of gnosis and still be very early along in what these plates are showing. You may have attained knowledge of what we call the royal secret, or the philosopher's stone, or the summum bonum, or enlightenment, or whatever catchphrase we want to use. But you might be very early along on structuring your life around that mystery, around that truth. Likewise, you might have a very balanced, well-developed life and have a very low level of gnosis. So these things, you could be perhaps on two different rungs at the same time. And we will approach this in general as a one-time through major process of alchemy, of the great work as opposed to the lesser work of necessity, the outer order, you could say. We will approach it more from a grand work perspective. But I would say that you can apply these series, these 7 stages, to various aspects of your life. And one aspect of your life may be in this stage. Another aspect, you might be here in one aspect of your life. You might be here in another aspect of your life. You might be here in one thing. You might be here in one thing. Okay, these are very fluid, and it takes time to allow this work to penetrate into your consciousness and your subconscious for it to come alive and speak to you. It is most useful as a roadmap for understanding where you are, where you've been, and where you are going. With that, let's start at the beginning. So we're going to zoom in on the top now. We're going to hope this zoom works nice and smoothly for us. Here's our first 4 plates. You're going to have to bear with me just a little bit on some of these zooms. There we go. Here are our first 4 plates. The Arma Artis, the alchemist with his flask, the knight subdividing his essence into the lunar and solar streams, and the reunited, the completed king and queen. Obviously, there are some major links to this in the Christian alchemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. Let's go deep into the first plate. And to make this easy, we're going to use the Harley manuscript because it is the most famous version out there, and the one you're probably most familiar with. The first plate, the Arma Artis, the arms of art. You see a plate of armor, a knight's helmet, a shield with the sun upon it. And the great thing about these high-res digitals is you can zoom in and really get some nice detail on these. You see that this armor of art, is draped with watery strokes of the heavens, the starry heavens. You could say this represents the robe of glory, the first estate of man, which was talked about in Martinism, as well as the hymn of the pearl, as well as other alchemical texts. With a crown, 3 lunar crescents above, atop which is a larger sun. And around it all, figures of nature. This shows the divine operating within all things and without all things. The sun above is a mirror of the sun below, or I should say the sun below is a mirror of the sun above. The things that are above are a reflection of the things that are below for the accomplishment of the one wonderful work. We should understand that that catchphrase, as above, so below, is not necessarily a reality to the uninitiated. Is not necessarily a reality to the profane. but rather it is an ideal. It is a reality that occurs once true adepthood has been attained. When that which is above is as that which is below, that which is within is as that which is without. Keter and Malkut and Keter after a different manner, to use a Kabbalistic terminology in there. Just like we see that the sun above, with its straight waves, straight rays and wavy rays, that's a fun one to say, is different from the sun below, with purely, with these rays that are in motion, as it's spinning. You could say that the sun above is the transcendent God, whereas the sun below is the immanent God. Or the sun above is the infinite light of Keter, and the sun below is the light manifest in the darkness. It is Tiferet in man. It is the light of Malkut, perhaps. Again, I said I'm not going to use alchemical terms, or Kabbalistic terms, but sometimes it's helpful. And yes, this monkey could represent primitive man, right? And that's a good key in that this is showing the primitive state. The original natural state of man before the so-called fall of the Judeo-Christian mythology. So this is what we begin with. This is the divine essence, the Gnostic spark of light, the Kabbalistic divine spark left over after the Shavir, after the shattering. This is that divine spark that is always there, that is always immanent, that we must always keep in mind during this work. And it's also that which we are seeking to regain at the same time. So instantly we're hit with a paradox. These arms of art also show that you are undertaking a knightly work, a work of chivalry, of nobility, of war. And that it has to be approached with those knightly virtues. And those could be a number of different things, right? We don't need to go into that. Honor, integrity, perseverance, patience, strength, compassion, all those kinds of things. Fortitude, wisdom, prudence, temperance. We could apply anything to that, right? So this is a knight beginning his quest. You could also link this to the Hymn of the Pearl of the individual in the beginning of the text before he is sent down into matter to begin the work of manifestation and going down to find the pearl of great price. The next plate of the alchemist with the flask, a guy with some holy goo, as one awesome teacher once said. He holds the tincture in his hand. And again, like I said, these are the basic elements of alchemy, of what you're seeking to accomplish, seeking to find that spiritual mercury that dissolves all things and unites all things. And again, symbols of nature, the kingship of the stag, the beauty of the peacock's tail and the coloring, the rainbow of many colors, and some Latin stuff up there that I forgot to have my notes out for that, so we're not even going to worry about what it says on there right now. Like I said, we're doing this unscripted. So remember your divine heritage. Remember that you are seeking the universal solvent, as well as the universal elixir, the elixir of life, the elixir of immortality. Next major building block, or example of the work as a whole, is the knight himself. You see his armor now. We'll zoom in on that. You see his armor now is composed of the usual alchemical colors: black, white, yellow, red. Negredo, albedo, citrinitas, rubedo. Crowned with 7 stars. Holding the sword of truth. the sword of the intellect, the mind, also the sword that cuts and separates, that solve process. Separate so that you may unite. And we see here these two little cherubim children peeing into a fountain. We've got a silver stream of pee, a gold stream of pee, and these are the pure liquid essences of the alchemist's soul, the solar and lunar natures, which, much like in The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, which was written after this text, much after, nearly 100 years after the first edition of the plates, at least. Just like in that text, you must first separate the two, melt them down so they can be malleable, so they can transform, go through different processes, maybe be drunk, and eventually coalesce again into the next plate. And again, symbols of nature. This is a natural process we are occurring with. It is said that in alchemy, man finishes what nature started. Alchemy should always mirror a natural process. You could also say that in alchemy, we are speeding up your karma. You're intentionally throwing yourself in the flask in order to live several lifetimes in one. Going back one moment, the Latin on this phrase, the Latin here around the flask says, in English, let us investigate the four elements of nature. So we begin with the premise that we are going to investigate the four elements. We are going to separate them in order that we may unite them. There we go. That's what I wanted, was the tab button. And when we finally unite them again into the final coagula process, we have the resurrected queen and king. And we see that in that central image, there are three stages of that image. Or three levels, you could say. There's a moon and a sun above. There's the human beings. And there's a moon and a fire, or a watery element, a viscous stone, perhaps, and the fire. So we see an above, a below, and the mediator between the two worlds. The most important element of this figure are the humans themselves, not the divine above, which, again, if we wanted to throw a Kabbalistic framework upon this, which, again, I said we shouldn't, but we can use that as a way for elementary understanding, to first grasp these concepts. But then we should eventually leave those things behind. You know, kill your darlings, break your old conceptions in order to have something new come in, right? Solve coagula. But if we did that, we could say that this sun and moon above, ruled by day and night, are the Kabbalistic neshama, or the world of the divine. The humans are the ruach. And below, we could call this, maybe instead of the nefesh, the guf, or the matter. So the spiritual, the matter, and the individuals that embody both, that stand between two worlds. Just like the common image of Adam Kadmon with 1 foot in water, 1 foot in earth. The queen has a scroll on her. Her scroll says, Lac veramium, virgin's milk. And she stands upon this living ball of liquid, the moon above her. The king's red scroll is coagula mascenculium. My Latin's horrible, sorry. And that is the masculine coagulation. You notice that she is draped white on the exterior, red on the interior. He is draped red on the exterior, white in the interior, and they are truly mirrors of each other. They are two parts of a whole. Partsiphum, you could say. And yeah, perhaps a fixed and a volatile, but I would state in this stage that they are both fixed. Now, sure, there is a fixed and a volatile as far as the what she is standing upon and what he is standing upon, but this is a stage of coagulation. Virgin's milk, the masculine coagulation. And again, images of nature around. We'll get to the bottom in a moment. Above, we see particularia, the particular. So perhaps we could go back and interpret this as the general, the world soul, the one soul, the Atman, the Akita, the divine spark in all things, manifested above and below. The particular, the perfected matter, manifested below, manifested in reality. There's also a Latin phrase at the bottom of this frame, via universalis particularibus, inclusis, meaning the particular is derived from and included in the universal way. I'll say that again. The particular is derived from the universal. So, from the universal, we make the particular. From the general to the particular. Saint Martin and Pasquale go over this again and again in their lessons on the universal table. Perhaps reviewing some of that will shed further light in this. Now down below we start to have some extra images occurring. And I believe these should be read left to right. These are images showing the life of Alexander the Great. I think I zoomed in a little too far for the feed. Of Alexander the Great. Considered to be at his time. So on the left, him beginning his conquests, beginning his wars. In the center, conquested, enthroned, the greatest emperor, the greatest ruler of man at his time, or perhaps ever. And on the right, we see Alexander as king with the scepter in hand, meeting a man in a barrel, and that is him meeting Diogenes. Even after he was the greatest emperor of the largest kingdom, when he met this philosopher, Diogenes, he aspired to be like him. And that definitely links into the concept that alchemy is the royal art. The royal art of alchemy. That it is a work done by kings, and it's also a way to become a king. And we mean that in a philosophical manner. As well as a very descriptive term of what this should do to an individual as they go through it. Becoming master of their kingdom. Master of oneself. Both within and without. Which we will get to when we get into the 7 processes. I'm going to butcher these stories. You can read about Diogenes Alexander. But anyways, so him going through the conquest, becoming king, and learning that his next work is to become the philosopher. He goes up to Diogenes, I'm the greatest king of the world, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, that's nice. You're standing in between me and the sun. Please move. And of course, Alexander did. So, backing up on those, before we go forward again, got to make a little better way to do this transition. I'm trying to do a lot of things at once here. No. Okay, we're going to keep this one open. We're going to move to the edits. Perfect. And we're going to make those bigger. So moving back. To the original first 4. The divine nature, within, without. The divine spark. Remember the 4 elements. Separate the elements so that you may purify them. Make them into one. And I forgot to say that the Latin on his shield there, his red and gold shield, I'll read just the English. Out of 2 waters make one, you who seek to use the sun and the moon. Give it the sparkling, burning liquid to drink, and you will see that it is dead. Then out of the water, the earth is made, and the stone is multiplied. And you will see that process occur in these 7 sequences which are about to dive into now. And yes, you could definitely say that these two sides of these streams, of these individuals, could mirror the pillars of mercy and severity. But again, I think we should try to get away from being too Kabbalistic about it. Just like there is no relation to this in the tarot, there is no relation between these and the 22 Hebrew letters. Now let's zoom in on just these next 14. So if these are the basic elements we must remember in the work, it is the basic outline of what we are doing. These are how you do that work. They are the specific operations that each individual must go through. 7 steps, shown in 2 different ways, from 2 different perspectives. Each of these is attributed to a planet, and it conveniently follows the path of the flaming sword in HaKabbalah: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sol, Venus, Mercury, Luna. One way that I've also viewed these when I was going through the Outer Order of the Golden Dawn, I think it's very easy to graft upon these the elements of earth, air, water, fire, spirit, Adeptus Minor, Adeptus Minor without, Adeptus Minor within. Now, those terms are not used in the Golden Dawn, they're used in Crowley's AA, but you could say this is Neophyte Adeptus Minor, and here's maybe your subgrades. But I do think that is a limited view of the Splendor Solis. That helped me to get a first understanding of it, and it is useful to start with that. But I think we eventually want to transcend this and realize that these are much greater operations than the outer order work of necessity. That is only an initial way to understand them. So as we go through them, hopefully this will help show why I thought those were Sephirotic at first, i.e. 110, 29, 38, 47, Portal, 5-6 within without, or Malkut, Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Portal, Tiferet. But really I think Tiferet's down here. I am seeing, it's saying, sorry, we're having trouble playing this video. Are you guys still seeing me? Please let me know if you are. Facebook Live sometimes drops the video that I see that you're getting. So I just want to make sure that we're... Okay, good. We're still live. Thank you for bearing with on that. So let's jump into those steps next. Hey, I've got it open twice. I probably have a lot of things open, huh? So the first stage of the 7 series process is definitely an image of Vitriol. Visita interiora terra rectificando invenis occultum lapidem. Visit the interior of the earth. By rectifying, you will discover the hidden stone. You see these 2 little gnome-looking guys. Very easy to see why I first grafted the element of earth and Malkut upon this. Entering into a mountain, going down into the earth, with instruments to dig, instruments of mining. We also see the waters of the lunar crescent, showing that the earth that we're entering into is the mind and the psyche of the alchemist himself. That this is a human work. This text is not about smelting metals. This text is not about spagyrics. It is about transforming the human consciousness. And that's why it is truly the great work of spiritual alchemy as opposed to the mundane work of laboratory alchemy. I apologize to those who are really... I don't mean anything by that. Just saying this is purely the spiritual alchemy. Mining the ore. And we're diving into the earth to discover the prima materia. Discover the first matter. And I would say that the alchemical process, the true great work, the inner order work, does not begin until one has knowledge of the prima materia. This moon here especially shows that we're diving into our unconscious nature, our subconscious, our unconscious principles, our feminine nature, and we must be led by our intuition. The rational mind will only get us so far. We are here to work with the emotional mind. And we must be led by our intuition, not just by our intellect. We see these nice naked cherubim. Down below, like I said, this is the actual conscious work you're engaged in. You're intentionally diving into yourself to extract that gold, symbolized by any forms of meditation, by you entering upon the work, by entering into oneself in the first steps of initiation. You could also say it's like metanoia, turning away from the world and going into oneself. This is mirrored down below, which I think one thing that I've been told by one of my teachers is that this shows the unconscious process is occurring as one is going through these 7, 14, 22 plates. In this unconscious process, you see the word here, Esther. And it talks about the biblical story of Esther and a Persian king, don't remember his name, but that I think at some point in this history, there was like a butchering of the Jews going on or something, and he was unfit to lead the Hebrews at that time that existed in Persia or something like that. Probably butchering this. But the key is that you see the king giving over his scepter to his princess, to his queen. He hands over the reins to the unconscious, to the feminine. The sun, the masculine, pretty much all. Thank you very much. Artaxerxes. The conscious mind gives the keys over to the unconscious for her to take the reins in this work. So we must let go of our constant need to intellectualize everything. Even though we still need a rational mind, we must let go and feel and allow ourselves to go through these processes and be changed on a deep level, not just an intellectual level. So that first process of vitriol, diving into the earth, beginning the process, which is going to be mirrored by its corresponding image below it. Thank you, yes, he wanted to have the Jews executed. Esther was a Jew and stopped him from slaughtering her people. Exactly. This image here shows the soul of the alchemist in the vessel, and below, the way that he relates to the mystery itself, the way that he relates to the world without, the way that he perceives his reality during this stage. And we see in that vessel that here is a child, a small boy, who is using bellows upon a green lion, upon a green dragon. And that is the raw force of nature, the raw elemental primal fire, the secret fire, you could say, that spark which united the entire universe. It is also his own animal nature. It is his unrefined power. It is that spark within him that is not perfected, that is an animal, that is a nephesh, that is perhaps a kli. Remember, kli just means vessel, right? And we see below it a wreath of green, showing that this is a gentle heat being applied. It is a natural heat. It's literally the heat of the body. 98 degrees. It was common for alchemical vessels. Let's say if you're doing a spagyrics. In spagyrics, you could say that one of the ways that I like to do the distillation, the maceration process, is to put them on top of a water heater, because a water heater is going to keep a nice warm temperature, but not hot. Warm like a body, right? Or there's a legend that there's a practice in alchemy of burying it in horse dung, horse manure, because when it starts to break down, it gives off a gas that creates a natural heat about 98 degrees. So this is a gentle heat. This is the body of the alchemist. But there is also there's an external heat applied now. A gentle, light heat. It's externalized. This is the beginning of the work. There needs to be a fire outside. And we will see different levels of flame being applied in different stages of the work. So this is the alchemist. You can also, as a 110 in a Zelator in Malkut, you could say this is entering into your body, this is working with pranayama, this is activating the inner dragon. All those things apply too, but I think those are lesser interpretations of what it's really pointing at. Doesn't mean they're wrong, they're just lesser. There's more to it. Each one of these 7 frames and the bottom 7 is also going to have a deity at the top. And that deity shows the planetary phase according to Trismosin. This planet is Saturn, Capricornus, right? Being led by 2 green lions by the raw force of nature. And we see all around a rather bleak picture. So the initiate at this point is perhaps his experience of reality is that it is a rather bleak nature. We see an individual we see all these different things that are of toil, of hardship, of struggle, of death, decay, sickness, right? And this is indicative of the state of the initiate when he enters upon the occult path, he or she. Many individuals enter the occult path because they feel something is lacking in their material life. They feel like there's something missing in the world, right? That perhaps all is not well. This is much like the Buddha when he first went out and saw suffering. He sees suffering that turns him to the internal process of diving into the earth, diving into vitriol. Yeah, I don't know what that guy's doing to that pig. That's some weird stuff going on. We see an individual here pouring water into a casket, but it has a hole in it. So it's a symbol of futility. It's like nothing, what does this matter? We see an old man leaning on a stick. We see an old woman. Death. This might be like organized religion or something. It's a funeral. There's a funeral going on here. There's plowing the earth. All the pains of life. We see a man being hung and executed in the back. We see someone else being flayed. So, at this point in the work, the initiate may have a rather bleak perspective on reality. You might call this like the dark night of the mind. Or better yet, I would say metanoia. Turning away from the world to do the inner work. To begin the initiatory path. This will evolve. The next stage after diving into the earth, handing over the reins to the unconscious, comes what could be interpreted as a separation, a first separatio. I first interpreted this as an air image, as ascending up the astral ladder from Malkut into Yesod, up the path of Tav, up the tree of life. 2 philosophers are seen, again like the king and queen in mirrored robes, white within, red without, red within, white without, pointing at the tree. Go to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the tree of life. Pick the ripe fruit. So he goes up there, picks the fruit. The birds scatter off. And you see that happen in many other series, such as Mylius's Azoth series. Maybe we can do a call on that one sometime. And you see that tree has the crown upon it as well. So this is most likely the tree of life. That is one Kabbalistic perspective to look at it. But of interesting importance is this image down here. And here's one of the ways you can tell the dating of the manuscript, is some of them will have a date right here. 1582 is this one. Remember we talked about the unconscious, right? The feminine principle, taking the reins. This is the planet of Jupiter. So we start to see much nicer things occurring, right? We do see a separation back here. It looks like some kind of a war, perhaps. But here are women bathing in a fountain, naked, bare, open, meeting with their kind, as one person once said, as a woman once said to me when we were talking about this. I like that. Negative inclinations, thoughts leaving the host. These here. Yeah, birds. Negative things leaving the host. That's nice. We see here the women as are the center, and the men have become passive. The men are onlooking. They have the scepter. So this is a beginning of, now we could say this relate to the initiatory path. Once you start to do the work and you start to pluck some nice ripe fruit out, things start to seem better, right? Things seem nicer. And we have some enjoyment, some bathing, crystal waters, a spa-like experience. This is what you could also call an Isis stage. If you look at the EAO phases of alchemy, Isis, Apophis, Osiris, the Egyptian deities, Isis representing the whiteness of a nice beginning of when you're engaged in the work, everything's fun and exciting, you're getting good benefits out of it, things are starting to change in a positive way for your life. Apophis, a stage of blackness, negredo, and darkness, a stage of death in which things are dying around you in your life, and things are going horribly wrong to your perception at the time. And then the stage of Osiris, which unites those two. And it takes what was that perhaps immature Isis phase, or that naive understanding of the Isis phase, and rolls it into now a conscious, revived, coagulated Osirian consciousness. And that EAO process we can relate to our lives in so many ways. We see ourselves go through it day by day. Every time we wake up, get tired, fall asleep, resurrect again. You can see this in your relationships, in your careers, in financial markets. There's an excellent paper on the Sodalitas Rosicrucis website under Public Documents. 2 documents. The first one called Initiation and Death, and then Initiation, Alchemy, and Life. And the writer of those documents goes in depth on this EAO process. We'll talk about that much more in depth on another webinar. But right now we're going to stay focused on this. Now this one mirrors with that of Jupiter here. Understand that when we look at these animals or birds or dragons that are in the flask, it's always the same individual. It's a sealed alembic. It is the sealed alembic of your work, of your soul, and that is why it is so utterly important that when you are going through this work, you learn to keep a sealed alembic. And this is the true meaning of silence. This is the true reason why the Rosicrucian emblem of the finger upon the lips of Harpocrat, working in silence. It's not about secrecy. It's not about not revealing the mysteries and a password. It's about that this work has to grow in the silence of your soul. It has to have a sealed alembic for something to grow within it. And if you're always blabbering on about your gnosis or whatever, then the ego's now back in charge, right? Rather than the unconscious. And there's no sealed alembic for the transformation to occur within. So it's always the same figure that keeps transmuting through all of these, okay, and reaching different states. Here, we see that first raw green lion, that green dragon, that raw force of nature, is now separated into 3 birds of the alchemical colors of black, white, and red. And they are warring against each other. This is the soul of the alchemist, the mind, brain, soul of the alchemist, warring with its different parts. You could, if you wanted to, apply these birds as the neshama, the ruach, and the nefesh. That works very well here. It's the parts of the psyche of the alchemist warring against himself. We see here a man trying to tame a horse, right there, trying to tame the animal. There is still a green, gentle fire from without that is applied at this time. We also see what looks like a spark here. Maybe it's a point where the vessel almost cracks. I'm not really sure. I just noticed that, actually. That's something to think about in this stage as you contemplate this in the future. And we see at the top that the planet now ruling is Jupiter. Pisces, Sagittarius, two planets that Jupiter rules. When you look at the outer frame, the way that the adept or the initiate, the aspirant, views his reality now, or his relationship with the world, his relationship with the mystery as well, we see beneficent things. That which was so morose in the Saturnian stage is now transformed. We see higher learning over here. We see kingship and nobility. We see someone being knighted, or really maybe someone being crowned. Yeah, that's a king being crowned by the Pope. And like we said, when someone begins the work on the path, it's like, oh, I found this new system. I'm a 110, I'm a 2-9 the Golden Dawn. I really get it now, and things are happening. And, you know, you have a complete shift in perspective of what you had in the previous emblem. This emblem of futility and just like meaninglessness now has great joy involved in it. But we should always remember that previous stage of darkness, because it's going to start again. These cycles of Yao will continually happen in our lives. But perhaps we can learn to fix our consciousness to not be thrown so hard to the left, to the right, to down, to up. The next stage in the upper 7 series is the drowning of the old king. We return to a simple frame of nature. We'll get down to this in a moment, in the bottom. Let's zoom in for a moment. We see here an old king being drowned and throwing his arms up. We see a son. We see an old king and a new king, a young prince. You see that his robes don't quite fit him. They're large. He's swimming in these robes, right? He hasn't grown into maturity yet. He's not even grown into his role yet. He's a brand new king. But he holds the scepter, the 7 stars. He holds the silver and the gold crown upon his head. He holds a gold orb in his hand with the white dove of the spirit, the white bird of the spirit. I don't know if it's a dove, but it's a white bird. And we see above him, above them, 2 suns, or a sun and a star. And a star is a sun, right? The sun is a star. And this sun shines upon everything. It's shining upon the young new king. It's also upon the dying king. Even though it's obscured by the clouds, it's still there. And this is a perspective, this is perhaps a stage of killing our old conceptions. You could say in this stage, the process of individuation begins to get real. So all the joy we saw in the previous stage of plucking this ripe fruit and women bathing and Jupiterian beneficence and being crowned, all of a sudden you're an old man getting thrown in the water. And this is where individuation really begins. One of my tutors used this as a point to talk about Jungian individuation and how we tend to walk around in the world in our intellectual mind dividing ourselves. I am Paul, the martial arts teacher. I am Paul, the husband. I am Paul, the initiate of this. I am Paul, the real estate guy, this. But none of those are really who you are. They're just things you do. But the more and more we identify with those aspects of our persona, the more and more we divide ourselves from our true nature, right? From that original robe of glory, from that knightly armor in the very first plate. So as we start to pluck those pieces of ripe fruit in the previous stage, you now have to start adjusting yourself to them. You might have to kill, well, you will have to kill old aspects of yourself to transform old aspects of ourselves. And I think we should be careful when we talk about killing the ego. If you don't have an ego, if you don't have a ruach, you don't exist. Your vessel has nothing to lead it, right? The ego gets a bad rap sometimes. We should be very clear when we use those terms. We're talking about transforming the ego. And it is a death process, but you always need a vessel. And that's why after this old king dies, this new king is born. This young teenage king comes out. this prince. And you see that his star is not as bright as the sun is. It's one star in sight, right? The rising dawn. So this is an aspect of drowning your old self, drowning old aspects of your persona that need to be transformed, and the birthing of a new self, but that new self is still immature as well and naive as well. And we see below another figurative representation of this same process. We see on the left a woman and a satyr or faun mating underneath a tree, and then a man with a club coming to beat them up. Then we have this blank space here, probably symbolized by the transformation occurring. Maybe it's blank because you have to figure out what that means to do that for yourself. And then coming to the right, you now see that same woman and the faun, but the man that was clubbing them and fighting them before now defends them and stands between them and the attackers. Yeah, things fall apart, like Yeats, The Second Coming. That was an excellent poem. We should talk about that sometime. I wrote an essay for my English degree. One of my final essays was about that poem and how I believe it's a representation not only of revelations, but of the convolution of forces from Malkut to the next Keter of the next world. Of the convoluted forces, as the Golden Dawn calls it. But anyways, that's tangent. So we see here these concepts in morality, the concepts of morality, of ways of life, of things that perhaps we've once warred against. After this certain level of gnosis, this certain upcharge, we might completely flip our perspective and actually come to defend that with our own lives. And I think this is highly important, especially in today's world. People tend to get so stuck in one perspective, in one opinion, whether we're talking political parties or, I don't need to give you examples. Look on Facebook. Families are being torn apart. People are fighting because they get stuck in these rigid opinions and are not willing to listen to each other and are not willing to change. And this shows a man attacking what he might have thought was an abomination at one point, right? The woman mating with a satyr. And now he goes and defends their right. He defends them against others who are just like he was. This man is doing the exact same thing he was doing, but he has shifted his perspective, and he now defends that and comes between it. And that is an example of the spiritual maturity that begins to occur with this stage. You could also call this obviously there's a stage of sinking here, of submersing oneself in the mercury, in the matter, for oneself to be dissolved. And that through that, what comes out of it is not the same thing that was there before. Let's move on to the next stage 4. Stage 4 we almost skipped this. This links to that same image of the drowning king. What was 3 birds of 3 different colors warring within themselves, within the alchemist's soul, now comes out as one unified white bird. It still has 3 heads with 3 crowns, but now a certain stage of individuation has occurred. The alchemist has brought these warring parts into himself, and though they are still individual, 3 heads, they're united into one body now. And they have the purity of the white eagle. So you could perhaps call this a sublimation, right? Linking back to the waters in the plate that corresponds above it. Note below, actually we'll get to that in a second. So, those warring parts of the psyche are now transformed into a unity, into a purity. You could say that this is a regaining of an aspect of the divine spark, a regaining of like a certain purity, perhaps. And another reason I thought this applied well to, obviously the drowning if you look at Golden Dawn imagery, it could apply to a 3/8 grade to Hode. It's water, right? It's drowning in water. And here's that purity of the white that comes from that. We see above here the planet now applies to Mars. We see Aries, right? Scorpio, being led by 2 wolves. And we see all around us that previous beneficence that we saw of like arts and higher learning and kingship has now turned to complete utter chaos and war. And when one starts to realize that one has to kill those aspects of yourself that are holding on to outdated modes of reality, conceptions, ideas, it is a painful experience in which you feel like the entire world is against you. You might be fighting with the world outside of you. You might be creating wars and battles and chaos and destruction and death, or feel like the world is putting upon you that. This is very common in grades when, in like a Golden Dawn order, when people get to this grade, maybe like victimhood becomes a part of their MO. And it's just a stage. It's just a stage that they're going through. We see someone over here pillaging someone's house. We see villagers being slain by armed knights. See people being chased through the fields here. Homes and churches being burned. Castles burning. Very not pleasant. Now, what is ironic about this stage is that look at the fire now. The fire has now turned red. He said same solid red in the bottom. Let's go back. It was green. It was a light and gentle heat from outside. Now, the only way to get through this painful process is to make it more painful. And that seems like a conundrum, like a paradox. The only way to get out of this pain is to turn the heat up more and to accelerate the work, to separate those parts of yourself, to drown those parts of yourself that need to die in order to be reborn. This can be, let's make this practical. Let's say maybe you're in a bad relationship and you need to get out of that. That's a friggin' painful process, right? Maybe you need to get out of your job and career and find something new. Maybe you need to move to a new home or change or get a new, something drastic has to occur. And the only way to do it is to just do it. So we increase the heat at this point in the stage. Moving on to the 4th stage, going up to the top rung of the 7. We'll zoom in first and then zoom out. Pedal down, that's right. Pedal to the metal. We see a man coming out of a murky water, out of a murky stream, with no persona. We see that if you compare this to the young prince, the young king in the previous image, who barely fit into his clothes, he's now developed. He's a man. He's stronger. And I would say he is more complete, even though he's composed of 3 colors. This mirrors back to those red, white, and black birds that were fighting within his soul. They are now integrated, and he's able to differentiate with them and between himself and start to understand them. He knows that I'm just a big ball of Negredo, and there's little parts of me that are Albedo. There's little parts of me that are Rubedo. So maybe different parts of his psyche are in different stages. But he's starting to bring these elements together. He's starting to grow in power. And the most important thing here is that he meets the angel. The Holy Guardian Angel, Sophia, whatever you want to call it, the higher self, descends through 7 raid. Well, it's actually a 6 raid star, but descends and gives him the robe of glory. Gives him his clothing. Gives him his essence. And this is that meeting of the angel. We see around it, we return to imagery of nature, natural processes always occurring, a kingship occurring, the stag, and man So you have the primitive nature and the kingly nature meeting themselves. He's reduced himself to the primordial elements of salt, sulfur, and mercury. He's reduced himself to these basic negredo, rubedo, albedo principles, the building blocks of his consciousness, the building blocks of his soul. And now the primitive can meet the royal, the kingly. And the primitive has this bird with many colors on its head. This is going to be mirrored. So this is the conscious work. This is going to be mirrored by this stage. And we notice again the red, white, and black colors. That same dragon we saw in the very beginning, that same dragon we saw is now refined and stronger and meaner looking. It is a dragon that has grown in power, that raw force, and it now has 3 heads. Again, rubedo, albedo, negredo. Notice there is no fire. The external heat has now been internalized. Some would say that up until this point in the work, when you were using the external fire, that you could spoil the work, or you could break the vessel, or you could turn back. You could quit. Many initiatory systems have a specific stage where they say, if you take this next step, you cannot ever turn around. And they're not saying that as a threat. They're saying it as a warning of care, that once you start on the next step, these changes become fixed and permanent. And you could say that's either in this stage or the next stage, I don't know. But it's something to start considering, is that the fire has now been internalized. When we look at the top to see what planet we're corresponding with, we see the planet of Tiferet, the planet of the sun. Now, going back to the previous one just for a moment, returning to the lesser interpretation of these as like Golden Dawn grades or Sephirotic Kabbalistic grades, you could say this is Netzach in the sense of receiving the robe of fire. Kind of a little weak, though. Here we see a firm solar influence, rooted in Tiferet. You could say perhaps this is adepthood. He has now integrated that raw force. He's become that raw force he was seeking to awaken beforehand. The child was seeking to awaken that raw force. The Kundalini force. The secret fire. He has now become it. But he's still divided. He's still 3. And around him, we again see martial elements. As someone said, combat training, practice, sporting combat. But this is so utterly different than what is here. This is a martial effect. This is violence unchecked. This is destructive. Mars at its most destructive. Here we see that same fire now internalized and refined. More noble. And we see positive games. I really like this one right here. It's like a guy with he's probably throwing a big ball, like big boulder throwing, but it looks like he's doing granny style bowling. We see here some guys doing some interesting forms of wrestling, or maybe something else. We see some wrestling and judo going on here, some pole vaulting, some archery. Martial elements, but in a refined manner now, as opposed to the raw experience of before. These are games. These are all games they're playing. What was before so utterly painful, you could perhaps say that this is the dark night of the soul, which is experienced as one is slaying one's old self. You could say that this is the dark night of the soul, mirrored by all those martial forces here, and that now we've come into a completely different state of consciousness to where those same things are just mere games. And we treat them with a certain kind of levity. This is maybe when child's play really comes into the work. We start to really understand what that means. And this is when perhaps we become adepts. And as adepts, you have a completely different perspective than you had just a day ago, 6 months ago. Moving on. The fifth stage in the upper series is a further fixing of the work. Pretty general nature things going on around. But in here, we see the hermaphroditic angel. The soul of the alchemist has now regained its angelic nature, its divine spark. And we see him clothed in the alchemical colors of black, red, and white, with the angelic wings. But hermaphrodite, still two. They are both glowing with the golden and the silver rays, but they're still two. You see in his right hand, not stage right, but in his actual right hand, he's carrying what's either could be considered a globe, as in holding the entire world in his hands. I got the whole world in his hands. And in that, you can see multiple levels, stages, worlds. You can see the entire world from one end to the other. Or it could be a shield or a mirror that allows him to peer into all four worlds. In his left hand, he holds an egg or a stone. The stone of the philosophers. The stone from which he will birth his next stage. The root of all creation. You could say in his left is Keter and his right is Malkut. That he has united the above and the below, the masculine and the feminine, the angelic and the material. The angelic is now a part of the material, a part of the man. So this is truly a symbol of balance here. A stage of uniting above and below, within, without. Within, without. And this is mirrored in the flask by this dragon now is transformed into a peacock. The peacock of many colors. And this is the peacocking stage. This is Trinitas stage, the stage of the rainbow of many colors that occur, in which if you're doing spagyrics and you're in your calcination phase, this is that phase where you, after doing solution and going back to calcination, you might start to see pink, yellow crystals rather than just white crystals. This is also the stage of beauty in some sense. And we see above it, fittingly, Venus. Libra. We see Venus. And around him, the adept's perspective is changed again. Now, many different things are going on here. We see, there's the date again, 1582. We see dancing and frivolity. You see a couple taking a walk through the gardens. You see people bathing in the river. You see two lovers riding off into the forest on a horse to go have some fun time. You see the innocence of children dancing. You also see what, I don't know, I always thought this was like a drunk dude. He's like, I got that last girl at 1:55 a.m. in the bar. I'm going to grab her. And then you see over here a guy who's like drinking, but it kind of looks like he's drinking in excess. He's a big guy. He's got grapes. He's drinking a giant flask. You see music and poetry. So this can go many different ways. There's a date as well, 1582. There can be the innocence of Venus and the enjoyment of pleasure. There can be the excess of it. And I think in this stage, one of the common things for the new adept to experience is analysis paralysis, or the problem of opportunity costs. That once you have that white egg that is in the image above, once you are that, you've regained that, then we'll get to that. Then now you have infinite possibilities. You hold Keter in your hand, you hold Malkut, the entire world in your hand. You can do anything, you become anything, you can do anything you want to do. But that also can be rather crippling, because there can be so many possibilities that you don't know what to do. There can be so many possibilities to where you realize that every act that you do, every choice that you make negates another choice. that by choosing to do one thing, you're choosing not to do another thing. And this can be a very this can be a major struggle, existential struggle for an individual, in which they realize that in order to have anything, you must let go of something else. And this is a stage in which we recommend our adepts to take some time off from work, from the esoteric work, and to live their life, return to the mundane, return to matter. Figure out what your philosophy is, what your morals, what your ethics are, what your job needs to be. Do you want a relationship? Do you want to travel? Do you need to go back to school? Are there any things that you've left off in your life? And choose how you're going to manifest your understanding. I'm sure it is. This is one of the most important plates, and Jung studied the heck out of this. That's where he got it from. Now, for the first time, we see a hole in the roof, a place from where the spirit can escape. We also see the alembic is chained. It's chained down. Otherwise, it will literally just float away. The spirit can go out. You can have a complete lack of direction and focus and know where to go with your life. This fixing here, in one sense, can represent you choosing your path, making a decision. And I think we should step back again. There's something I wanted to mention that relates to that. Here, the aspiring adept is immature and naive in the sense that they think things are happening to them. All this war, all this chaos, right? He doesn't have the Gonzagas. I don't know that those are breasts. I'm sorry, that's women. He doesn't have the huevos to take control of his life. Here, he has the guts, the strength, the inner strength to take control of his life. The innocence and purity and naivety of that young prince, that young new king, this white bird, doesn't have the strength of the man that comes out of the stream, of the dragon. The dragon now has the strength of will to face reality, to take responsibility for himself. It's not happening to you, you're doing it to yourself. He now has the strength to face the world. And now, he must choose. Or, he can become this guy down here and drink himself away. And we've all done it. I know many people have gone through this process, and that is I don't want to say a necessary stage, but it's a stage a lot of people have gone through. When they come to Gnosis, and when you realize that you can do all things, and why should I do A over B? Morality can fall apart. Some people become moral free agents at this point. They become amoral. And you must fix yourself in order to make any further progress. Otherwise, the next stages will never occur. The next stage, going up to the top series again, we return to a not-so-nice image. Notice, there's a lot of this, oh, this is nice, I'm doing well. Oh, crap, this sucks. This is really, really bad. Oh, this is better, actually. Oh, this is even worse than before. But we have to remember these are stages, and that one thing alchemy should teach us is that none of this is permanent. We're in a constant state of refining. And we may stay in one of these stages the rest of our lives, or the rest of eternity. So here we see, this was the old young prince who grew into a man. You see he's muscular, he's strong. And then this dark knight comes forth. Red within, white without, black, dark skin. And he comes and he, with this giant sword of steel and iron, cuts the old self to pieces. He cuts the old self into different parts of him. 5 parts here, the trunk and the 4 limbs. That's a great comment. He cuts him into 4 limbs, and he takes into 4 limbs and the 5th of the body, and then severs only the head. He keeps only the golden head. The rest of the body, throw it away. The caput mortem. And the caput mortem is used in different ways and different things. Here, he's keeping that caput mortem, that gold head, the dead head. And he's going to use that for the rest of the work. That's what gets thrown back into the alembic, into the flask. You see here something of maybe going off to war again or battle. We see ships coming. Looks like it's coming in, but also implies they can go out, a river. Coming into a white temple, a whole new level of a temple. We've never been this close to a temple at this point, right? Or close to a building in this sense. We see down here, I'm not really sure what's going on there, to be honest. We see a dude with what looks like 4 horses and a lady who's got the reins on one of those horses. We know that we're definitely separating the 4 elements. We're separating the quintessence, the spirit, which is the golden head, which is retained, the caput mortem. And we see below some kind of a struggle occurring here. And then the woman takes control and tames those wild horses, right? Again, we come back to the unconscious, the woman, the feminine principle, taking control of this. If you're working sexual alchemy, you could call this Sora Mystica. But you don't have to have a second to do this. The second is also within you. It is your own soul. But you could totally go through this whole thing and relate it to a you and a Sora Mystica. And notice that head that he reclaims, it looks rather feminine, right? Kind of like some of the renditions of John. The alembic that mirrors it below, this one here, is that of the White Queen. And this is a fixation. This is a coagula occurring, a stone. Again, we see here, 1582. Let's zoom in on her first. Fairly simple. We see a beautiful White Queen, breasts unveiled, robed in a heavenly white and blue, holding the scepter. Women will always check a man's ego. That's nice. Yeah. When we think about it in our lives, yeah. You see that she's standing upon a flame. She's standing upon a sun. There is, again, no external heat. The sun is internalized. She is being heated by the internal sun. She is receiving the light of the sun and reflecting it outwards. I don't want to go too far into the white stone on this talk, because I think that those who are at this stage will have a teacher that can help them work with this. But I would say that this white stone, or white wedding, he's now integrated his higher self, symbolized by the cutting off and keeping the quintessence, and disregarding the lower. He's completely detached from the matter and is going upwards into a white wedding above, up to Keter. And this is the planet of Mercury. Gemini, the twins. And we see the external frame, the arts and sciences. 7 liberal arts and sciences, right? Music, astronomy, literature, writing, measuring, calculating. Working in the higher sciences. And this is a stage of insight, of intuition, of heightened intuition fixed within the individual. Yes, and you start again, but now with a completely different prima materia, a different level of that matter. A fixation. There's a stone, there's a permanence that's occurred. A fixed state of consciousness that will never leave. A purity. Some might say that in this stage there could be 4 specific operations within this stage, and this stage may last 10 years. It may last your whole life. But those 4 operations could be calcination, burning the matter down again, solution, sinking it in the mercurial waters, separating the lower from the higher, and conjunction, bringing the masculine and feminine back together here, just as the sun is now within the flask. There's a heating. She's heated from within. These plates get increasingly harder and harder to describe, but we'll do our best. This is an increased contact, a firm connection between the higher self and the Ruach. The Neshama and the Ruach are linked. There is, in Kabbalah, there's this concept that Zorin Pin, the initiate, the Ruach, has no brains. He has no Mokin. He's not connected to the supernal triad. Here, the supernal triad is now regained. You'd probably say that happened earlier, but this is a further fixation of that. And there's a purity here. In order for the work to occur here now, one has to watch their anger, their reactions. There has to be a purity for that divine child to grow. A calmness. Symbolized by that feminine beauty. Moving on to the next, the 7th stage in the top sequence. We see the man, the alchemist, now submerged in a hot bath. We're going to zoom in, take this in stages. So we see him in a bath with an alchemist, who's also composed of the colors red, white, and black. Blue as well. I could maybe link back into the white stone and the blue of the queen. And we see that this man, looks like Jesus, is sitting in a hot bath with a white bird in his head. So that which was slain before is now rejuvenated. There's a continual cooking. That flask down there represents him. It is another image of him sitting in that hot bath. And his assistant, which is himself, is fanning the flames from without. But it's all him at this point. He understands that. And he's increasing the heat now as he sits in the waters. The fiery waters and the watery fire. A liquid is perhaps being drawn off into that flask at the side of the boiler. That white bird is the Spirit, the Holy Spirit upon him. We see 2 figures here, red, purple, calling out to him. Not sure exactly how to interpret that. We see emblems of nature around him again. We see forging metals. And you could dare say that this is the adept from here out. Continually refining, continually doing the operations. He doesn't look too happy there, does he? Perhaps he is stoic. I mean, he's choosing to be in the water. The frog has not jumped out of the water. Ever increasing heat, yes. And now he's in that boiling water. Continually performing the work. This will link below to the Red King, the Red Tincture, who stands upon the moon, just as she stood upon the sun. And he now regains his scepter and orb. He also looks rather young, right? It's a new, perfected divine child that has been born, which mirrors to him sitting in the hot tub, growing. Above we see Luna, Cancer, being carried by two maidens, holding the lunar crescent. Only one set of wheels now. We've never had that before. Well, I guess we did with the king, didn't we? Let's look at that real quick. With Sol. Yeah, Sol just had one. As does Luna now. And we see all around him, again, he's returned to regular life. He's out in the farm, he's catching fish, he's hunting. The women are collecting water for laundry. He's out conversing with neighbors, got his dog, is going on trips, traveling. We see this wide expanse of the countryside and the kingdoms and the towns. He's returned back to where he begun, but now there's a complete different perspective of it. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. That's a crayfish for Cancer. You can compare this to some of the previous stages. We just go through these real quick again. Feeling of dejection, futility, darkness. Things are starting to look good. Plucking that ripe fruit, getting some results from the work. Oh shit, things are real. Dark night of the soul. What's going on? War within, war without. Back to a refined form of that martial force. Now they're games, they're training, they're exercises. Frivolity, bliss, love, sex, drinking. Maybe to excess. Maybe carnal, maybe innocent. Depending on where you're at, depending if you're letting your spirit escape, if you're not sealing your alembic, or if you're fixing your alembic and taking control of your life, symbolized here. The higher work. I would say that everything from here back was microcosmic for sure. Somewhere between here and here, we begin to transition, probably here, we begin to transition into macrocosmic work. Now he's going out into the world, he's teaching, he's learning the higher arts and sciences, integrating the gnosis he's attained. And now he's going out and living his life, manifesting that mystery according to his will. Let's go through the top again, briefly. Visit to the interior of the earth. Find the hidden stone, give that scepter over to your unconscious mind, let go of your intellect. Allow yourself to feel, allow yourself to dive into the depths of your soul for this work. Begin to separate the dross from the gold. Begin to pluck those ripe fruits. The joyful work of having good results from the work. Now the work isn't so fun. I have to do some really hard things in order to progress. Things have to die, things have to transform, things have to change. My perspective on things has to change. I might have a complete flippant perspective. Dark night of the soul, perhaps. Coming out, receiving from the angel, from the holy guardian angel, the HGA, the angel of adoption, the good companion. Receiving the robe of glory, receiving enlightenment, receiving adepthood, receiving gnosis. Integrating that to where the angelic has become human, the human has become angelic. Holding Keter, holding the root of all. Being able to manifest all. Having to choose between these two. Oscillating still. Cutting off the old four elements. Letting go of everything now. Except that quintessence. Uniting up above. Remember, this is the white stone. Uniting above. And coming down and making all... There's a certain indifference in his face. There's a certain stoic indifference at this point. I would not call it apathy. A stoic content, perhaps. This is a lot more suffering that was going on in the one with all the war. There's a lot more. This work is a lot hotter than it was before, but he can deal with it now. His vessel can take the further heat. before he couldn't even handle a lesser heat. Let's move on to the last 4 series, and then maybe we'll do an overview again. So these last 4 here, you could say, are the most general, basic representation of the work. On the left, the sun either rising or descending. On the right, the sun arising on a golden dawn. Notice on the left, the sun looks like it's dripping into the waters, right? The consciousness is submerging into the unconscious. This could also be a representation of what it's like to live as an adept. Sometimes you're down, sometimes you're up. Sometimes you're setting, sometimes you're rising. Or as that image of the green lion eating the sun. Sometimes you're the lion eating the sun. Sometimes you're the sun being devoured by the lion. But through all of it, there's a stoic calm. And there's an understanding that this is child's play in women's work from here out. There's an understanding of levity, perhaps. Perhaps everything that was so heavy before it's just a thing. It's just a thing you do. You could say, as you look in on this image of the child's play, you have, I'm not sure if these numbers are going to mean anything, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 naked babies, 3 clothed children, 2 in blue, 2 in yellow. We have what looks like a caretaker, or maybe an older sister in blue. Or maybe that's the mom, I don't know. And then we have what's either the mom or the nurse, that looks like a mom though, dressed in red, white, and black. And she's holding the youngest of all the children in her hands. You see the black crow, the black again. But in that, it doesn't have the connotations that some of the earlier Negredo images had, the earlier death images. There's rebirth, there's youth here. It's just a thing. They're riding horses, they're playing games. There's something weird going on with that kid on the pillow. Yeah, they're riding horses holding swastika toys. And remember that the swastika has been used as a symbol in esotericism for forever. And reclaim it. The Nazis stole a very, very old, powerful symbol and misused it. It doesn't mean we can't use it in the proper ways. In fact, yeah, pinwheels. But it's a symbol of the 4 elements swirling. This is a tangent, but one of the symbols in the Golden Dawn, as well as in the SRIA, is the swastika. And it's used as an image of the sun spinning through the kingdom, the sun traversing the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 4 arms being the 4 elements, and the 3 squares between each of them being the 3 zodiacal signs of that element, cardinal, fixed, and mutable, the sun in the center, the sun cleaving its way through creation, right? The hammer of Thor. It's also a symbol of Ganesh, creation, of raw power, but of power under rule of the sun in the center. So we see her taking care of the youngest child with its thumb in its mouth or its finger in its mouth like Harpocrat. And then check this out. In the corner, yes, the Philfot, hammer of Thor. In the corner we see one child, apart from others, shut in a corner. Kind of reminiscent of Cinderella, right? And above her are the 2 flasks with a golden tincture. This could perhaps be a symbol of, as one person just said on here, I have become my own plaything. This is the Ruach, the untamed, the 7 aspects of the personality, playing, doing their thing, and now it's just a thing they do. You're no longer ruled by your Venusian, Jupiterian, etc. natures. You're no longer ruled by your persona. You allow them to play, recognizing that it for what it is, but your secret soul is in the cupboard, in the dark, growing, going through the transmutations, going through this death process still, always going through this refining process in the darkness. That is the divine child that we must nurture and grow in silence, in solitude, eternally. This mirrors with the next plate of women's work. And we see women, and don't take this to be a misogynist thing, come on. This is a 1500s document, right? We're talking about principles of polarity, of masculine and feminine. We're not saying women need to be doing the laundry, okay? We're talking about the passive part of humankind's psyche and soul. But doing laundry and cooking and boiling water and carrying water and drying clothes and linens and things like that. Child's play in women's work. The Ruach plays, but you always keep your soul, your stone that's growing in mind, and you go out and do the things you have to do. You chop wood, you carry water. The work that was so toilsome before is just a thing you do now. And we seek to live as this. We seek that golden dawn, the light of a golden day, the rising of the star. The subconscious does all the important work. That's an interesting comment. Alchemists used to catch dew that way with clean linen. Yeah, very nice. Very nice insight there. And we can see how these mirror in some ways the top four, at least in the sense that there are four. There's a beginning, there's an ending, there's a beginning, there's an ending, there's the processes we do in the work, there's the processes we do in the work. Here it's all high and mighty and scientific and alchemical and separate the four elements and the gold and silver tinctures. Down here it's just child's play and women's work, man. And you could say that with the attainment of Gnosis, when you first attain it, it's so special. You're so special. But now, at the end, it's just a thing. It is the most common thing in the world. This son doesn't look so happy, right? Drowning, looking to his right. But again, is this a rising? Is this a setting? But it is definitely not such a nice looking picture. There's like putrid waters here. There's lightning struck, decayed trees. But there is hope. There is gold in the east or the west. And then here we see things are a little better. There's still cut down trees. It's still rather dark and bleak in some of this. But there's new growth occurring. There's the sun looking out over his kingdom. And there is a certain stoic pensiveness to him. So taken as a whole, these are 22 emblems showing the alchemical process from the beginning to the end. And like I said, I think it's very useful to maybe throw some Kabbalistic Tree of Life things on these as a beginner way of understanding them. But we really do need to outgrow those crutches at some point and learn to see this on its own, right? And to interpret these symbols in a slightly different way, in their own way. That's all I really have for you. Perhaps I can show you some of the other plates before we go, just to see some different versions of it. Let's go to some rare ones that you never really see. Here's the Cassel. And some of these are out of order in other versions. We're not going to get into that right now. This one looks very similar to what we saw. This is the Cassel version, very close. Not really a lot of differences going on. There is something written on this one. I have not translated that Latin. Something stuntum martius or mortius. Si otum mortius. Ultris factus. Resolutus. Feria. Something tessorum habit. Something about death and resolution, separating. Pretty obvious there's a separation of death occurring there. Now I can't. There we go. Pretty similar. There's some words on this one too. So this one is one to look in deeper. Some of the same words. Draconum, nostrum mortum, something construit et vivat. Something about the dragon, our dragon dying, or death and life of the dragon. Something like that going on there. My Latin is not good. And my Latin person isn't on the call, I don't think. There's some words there, but you can't read them. We already went and looked at that. There's some words here on hers. Filius matus. Something mer maier est me. The son of our mother is me, maybe. Again, like I said, I'm just giving you my perspective on these. Something mors consummata, consummation, and the philia, noster, consummation of the Son, the Father, our Son, rubeus, something. So something about the Son and the Father becoming one, perhaps. Let's look at another one. This one is really similar, so we'll probably skip it. But I do like how there's different art. And sometimes looking at something by a different artist might trigger something different in you because you're so used to looking at one version. Right? That's a much more regal looking figure. It stands taller. That color's different there. His face is interesting there. In this version, we can clearly see a red and a white tincture, whereas in the most common version, they're both gold. So that's an important key right here. Red and that shows you exactly where we're at in the work. Red and the white tincture, the soul hidden away. Berlin Codex. Rather similar, Arma Artis. There's some extra flares in this one, though. I think there's a little more ornate, even though it's a dirtier manuscript and lower res, and a little more corrupted over time. There's some further details on these. See how the like muddy there? There's some details down here that weren't in the other version. Yeah, children look terrifying, right, in that one. I like how this shows the dark man and the white woman, further showing opposites. That doesn't say Esther, clearly, like the other one did. That's slightly different, but still shows the man attacking the satyr and the woman, now defending. That's different. This is all different, this frame. It's much more regal, you know? Here, he's united above and below. It's a much more regal frame than on the Allemande and other versions. Ooh. That's much more innate. So you see that these different people who redrew it in their own way maybe added little flares to it. And just like we say, each alchemist must make their own work, each Martinist must write their own myth. You must make this work your own. You're not here for rote memorization. That's the first degree. Second degree, something completely different occurs. Third degree, something completely different occurs. That's a very different frame. This is purely blue here. Blue or bluish purple. Yeah, you could look at the round frames versus square frames. There's so many more things we could go into on this, but I'll leave that to you in your future work. We got a couple more we'll go through. Here's the Aurum Velis version. Much more simplified. Arma Artis. This is exactly an image you see in some other plates. I think Basil Valentine or Mylius's begins with this exact image. The sun above, the sun below. The knightly armor. The first clothing. Simplified image of the alchemist. Simplified image of the knight separating the two waters, the two streams of his consciousness. Simplified image of the king and the queen. Much more European look in there. They don't look like little gnomes here. They look like grown men going down to the earth. There's still the water there. There's a bridge he has to cross. Here's a goat, Capricornus. One of them's about to attack him. You think it's going to be fun, but we're going to fuck you up. Here's a very different image of the tree. Different colors of the birds. Alchemists are still in their red and white converse colors. This is interesting because the king, and I think this is a primitive version. I think this is the 1532 version. No, I think this is 1590 or something. But that's an older king here. It's very different. I think it's better with him as the young king. And there's only one son. Here he's like dancing out of the... He's doing a little jig getting out of the water. He's also in the shape of the swastika. The four elements and the sun. Silver and gold heads. Solar and lunar. Solar and lunar. Interesting. Oh, now that gives us a further key. So if the lunar holds the egg and the solar holds the four worlds, if we were interpreting this as Keter and that as Malkut, the subconscious still has reign above. The feminine principle is still leading as the masculine is holding the product. There's a flip occurring there. And that's only one interpretation, of course. You could also interpret this as the seed, the egg from which he'll birth, so that would be more Malkut. Here it looks like he's almost slaying on a river, right? It's very different. The temple's different, but it's still there. Some kind of, and the ships coming in is still there, but it's different. He's like, look at my masculine body and my big beard. Here it's very clear that out of his broiler, that there's an essence being drawn out of it. Eternally. Simplified. Simple. That's not clear that it's going into waters. Looks like it's going behind mountains, almost. And it doesn't look so bleak. These are not all decayed and fucked up like they were in the other versions. Child's Play, there's only 3 of them here. And they look to be teenagers more. Of course, art was very different. Women's work, there's just 2 women there. Oh, this is... I just noticed this like the other night when my wife and I were looking over these together. I think only 2 versions have this. They have this character which looks just like the Fool in the tarot. This individual going out on the journey, or coming home from the journey, perhaps. That's unique to MacLean's version and the Aurum Velis version. Yes, and there are differences in the flasks and tops here. So while these are simplified, there's also different things that are pointed out. Lastly, I'm calling this the McLean version because I haven't found a source for it. It's quite similar to the version we saw a moment ago, maybe just a little cleaner. And there's that guy again, perhaps returning back from the work. Brings to mind the Zen of the ox herder, the 10 ox herding images of the East, returning back to the village. And there's another version I can't share. I'm not at liberty to share. But thank you all for attending this. I hope that it was fruitful. I hope that this inspired you to take a deeper dive into alchemy and maybe to get a set of these, either a poster or some small versions or some big versions, and tack them up on your wall and start to contemplate these as you go through your initiatory process, whatever that is. Thank you all very much for being here. We've gone just over 2 hours. I'm going to cut it out now. And there will not be a Mass this Sunday because I'm having a birthday party on Saturday. And definitely not going to be up at 9 a.m. for Mass. We'll plan on another lecture next Friday night. It might be on alchemy again, on a different aspect of it. Or maybe it'll be on scrying and astral projection. I don't know. We'll see. Thank you all very much for being here. I will work on getting some files, a folder uploaded, so you guys can have my some of my renditions of these, as well as this version that is scaled for 36 by 48 inches. All right. Thank you all mucho. Give me some time. I'll post that probably Sunday or maybe tomorrow morning. Thank you all. Take care. See you on the flip side.